Sri Aurobindo has been telling us about an eternal entity which lives within us and which is preparing some matter of divine felicity within us. And because that is happening, even now, in our state of ignorance, all the different parts of ourselves are longing for their perfection. And he says, our hearts are captured by ensnaring shapes. Our very senses blindly seek for bliss. All the sense capacities, they are longing for the fullness of delight. And then he continues, our error crucifies reality to force its birth and divine body here, compelling, incarnate in a human form and breathing in limbs that one can touch and clasp. Its knowledge to rescue an ancient ignorance, its savior light, the inconscient universe. And when that greater self comes sea-like down to fill this image of our transience, all shall be captured by delight, transformed in waves of undreamed ecstasy shall roll our mind and life and sense, and laugh in a light other than this hard, limited human day. The body's tissues thrilled, apotheosized. Its cells sustain bright metamorphosis. This little being of time, this shadow soul, this living dwarf figurehead of darkened spirit, out of its traffic in petty dreams shall rise. Its shape of person and its ego face, divested of this mortal travesty, like a clay troll kneaded into a god, new made in the image of the eternal guest, it shall be caught to the breast of a white force, and flaming with the paradisal touch, in a rose fire of sweet spiritual grace, in the red passion of its infinite change, quiver, awake, and shudder with ecstasy. As if reversing a deformation's spell, released from the black magic of the night, renouncing servitude to the dim abyss, it shall learn at last who lived within unseen, and seized with marvel in the adoring heart to the enthroned child Godhead kneel aware, trembling with beauty and delight and love. But first, the Spirit's ascent we must achieve. Out of the chasm from which our nature rose, the soul must soar sovereign above the form and climb to summits beyond mind's half sleep. Our hearts we must inform with heavenly strength. Surprise the animal with the occult God. And then, kindling the gold tongue of sacrifice, calling the powers of a bright hemisphere, we shall shed the discredit of our mortal state. Make the abysm a road for heaven's descent. Acquaint our depths with the supernal ray and cleave the darkness with the mystic fire. So in the early part of this canto, Sri Aurobindo was warning us about all these mischievous, hostile, small and ignorant influences that can come and disturb our growth, our progress. But now in this last part of this section, he's telling us or giving us a great prophecy and promise. He's telling us, well, let's read it together. Dana, would you start? Our error.
Our error crucifies reality to force its birth and divine body here, compelling, incarnating a human form and breathing in limbs that one can touch and grasp. Its knowledge to rescue an ancient ignorance. Its savior light, the inconscient universe.
Yes. Our error, all our failures and mistakes and imperfections, they are causing some terrible suffering to reality. But the fact that they are doing so is to force it to take birth here in a divine body, to get rid of this imperfect body and nature that we have here. We want reality, the utter truth, to be born in a divine body here. That's the will of evolution. It should become reality, should become absolutely compelling. We can't deny it. It should be incarnated in a human form. It should be breathing in limbs like we have, limbs that one can touch and clasp. And the knowledge of that reality should rescue this state of ancient ignorance that we are living in. Its savior light must rescue the inconscient universe, the universe of matter. So when that greater self, which is our true reality, when it comes pouring down like a sea to fill this image, this little human image of our transience, our short life. Then, when that great descent happens, all shall be captured by delight and transformed in waves of undreamed ecstasy shall roll our mind and life and sense, and they will all be laughing in a light other than this hard, limited human daylight. The body's tissues will feel a divine thrill, apotheosized, it means divinized. And the cells of the body will have to bear this metamorphosis, this change of form. Lela, will you read?
This little being of time, this shadow soul, this living dwarf figurehead of darkened spirit, out of its traffic in petty dreams shall rise, its shape of person and its ego face divested of this mortal travesty, like a clay troll kneaded into a god, new made in the image of the eternal guest. It shall be caught to the breast of a white horse, and, flaming with the paradisal touch, in a rose fire of sweet spiritual grace, in the red passion of its infinite change, quiver, awake, and shudder with ecstasy.
This little being of time, us, our little human being that lives in time for a short time. He says it's a shadow soul. It's not our true reality. This being is living, but it's a very small dwarf figurehead. A figurehead is on a ship, or the old-fashioned ships on the front, on the prow. They often used to have a carving, a painted carving of a figure. And the sailors really believed that that figure was guiding them or helping them and protecting them. There are some stories like that about figureheads that had beautiful gemstones for eyes. And then when the gemstones were stolen, then the ship could only sink, only have a disaster because the ship couldn't see where it's going. A figurehead, but it's just a small figurehead. It's only a dwarf image of the real being. This dwarf figurehead of darkened spirit. This figurehead is spirit. That's why it can lead us on our way. But it's spirit darkened in this state of ignorance. But when this transformation happens, when this greater self pours sea-like down, then that living dwarf figurehead will rise up out of its traffic. That's what it's been doing. It's been trafficking, exchanging petty dreams. But it will rise up out of that state. Then its whole person will change, its shape of person, its face of ego will be divested of this mortal travesty, of this appearance which is only a caricature of its real self, a travesty. It's a drawing which is distorting the person that it's supposed to reflect. But that will be taken away, that travesty, that false appearance. Instead, like a clay figure, which is soft and malleable, you can shape it. It says like a clay troll. A troll is a figure in Nordic mythology. It's a creature that actually belongs to the earth. No? It emerges from the earth in the darkness. And then it can do all kinds of dreadful things. If you get caught by a troll, anything can happen to you. But they can't bear even a ray of light. They will just turn back into stone then. So this clay troll, it's soft, it's malleable, this clay troll, which is our dwarf self. It's going to be shaped by that new presence into a god. It'll be completely new made in the image of this eternal guest, our soul within us. And then it will be embraced. It shall be caught to the breast of a white force, of the mother's force. And then its experience will be so intense, flaming as if it's on fire with that touch, that paradisal touch of the divine grace. In a rose fire of sweet spiritual grace. It will quiver, awake, and shudder with ecstasy. This rose fire, it's a very beautiful image. And I remember a children's story by George MacDonald, where there was a figure in the story, the grandmother, living secretly at the top of the house. And when finally the child found her, then she was like our mother, old and young at the same time. And she had a fire of roses. And if the child could dare to put his hand into that fire of roses, and it would be painful, but he could achieve the subtle touch, or the subtle feeling, so that whatever he felt, it wouldn't be the appearance. He would feel what is the reality inside. That would be a guide and a protection for him. Rose fire. And when I read this phrase, I remember going to the mother on my birthday in 1972. It's the only time I went to her on my birthday. She gave me a beautiful bouquet of red roses like that. And I cycled up to Oroville in June, in midday heat after being in the ashram. And there were these roses on my handlebars, somehow fixed. And really it was as if they were flames. They were so intensely quivering with energy, something amazing. So a rose fire like that, that wakes up everything with love and delight.
But one line we forget is the red passion of its nature.
Yes. So that's carrying on this idea of the rose fire. And this passion, it's the intensity of emotion. And it's being changed. It's a transformation that is happening. That makes the whole being wake up and shudder with ecstasy. Alexander.
As if reversing a deformation spell released from the black magic of the night renouncing servitude to the dim abyss, it shall learn at last to live within unseen, and cease with marvel in the adoring heart to the enthroned child Godhead, kneel aware, trembling with beauty and delight and love.
So this is also like a fairy story, isn't it? There's been a bad spell which has turned the child Godhead into something ugly and strange, a travesty. But when the spell gets broken, it gets reversed, that deformation. And the being is released from the black magic of the night. And it no longer has to serve the dim abyss, the lower levels of the little life that we've been reading about. The being will learn at last who was really living within inside it, in unseen. And it'll be seized with marvel in the adoring heart, and it won't help to be able to kneel down in adoration to the enthroned child Godhead. The child is always a symbol of the soul. If we have a dream with a beautiful child in, it's telling us something about our soul, the child Godhead. We'll kneel down and worship, and with awareness what is happening, trembling with beauty and delight and love. It'll be a great realization, a transforming realization. But something has to happen before that.
All this is saying about the little lead turning into AC.
Joel.
But first, the spirit's ascent we must achieve out of the chasm from which all nature rose. The soul must soar sovereign above the form, and climb to summits beyond mind's half sleep. Our hearts we must inform with heavenly strength, surprise the animal with the occult God.
So, in several places in the poem, Sri Aurobindo gives us these promising, these prophecies, but then it's as if there's always a condition. Something has to be achieved before this transformation can come about. So in this case, it's first we have to achieve the spirit's ascent, rising up out of the chasm, this crack in the earth from which our nature rose. Not our soul, but our outer nature has come out from the unconscious ground, the lower levels. It has to rise up out of that and above that nature. The soul must soar like a great bird, sovereign above the form, mastering the limited form, and climb to summits beyond mind's half sleep. This half consciousness of our mind must also go far beyond that. And our hearts must change. Our hearts we must inform with heavenly strength. We talked about this word, inform, forming from within. So this heavenly strength has to grow within our hearts, that it can give them a new shape. And we will have to, or that effect will surprise the animal parts of us they will have to recognize the God who has been hidden within us, the divine being. Rita, will you read?
Then kindling the gold tongue of sacrifice, calling the powers of the bright hemisphere, we shall shed the discredit of our mortal state, make the abysm a road for heaven's descent, acquaint our depths with the supernal ray, and cleave the darkness with the mystic fire.
So when we've woken up to that extent, what we'll be able to do is the true Vedic sacrifice. We can kindle this gold tongue of sacrifice and call down the powers of a brighter, higher hemisphere. There's this idea of the two hemispheres, no? There's the lower and the above. So we have to call the powers of that higher hemisphere. And then we shall stop being these ignorant, helpless, mortal beings. We shall shed the discredit of our mortal state, which is dominated by ignorance and death. And the fact that there's a lower hemisphere, we will make that lower hemisphere a road for heaven's descent, allowing all the powers of the higher hemisphere to come down through us. And our depths, the lower levels of our nature, will be made familiar with the supernal ray from above, and the darkness will be cut in half by the mystic fire lit up. But still we've got this one paragraph left to read. Philomena, will you read?
I put the root once more in the acrid mist, across the dangerous house that was not still, into the astral chaos
Chaos.
showed up mid the grey faces of its demon gods, questioned by the whispers of its flickering chores.
Ghosts.
Desired by
Sorceries.
of its flank force, as one who walks unguided through strange field, tending he knows not where not with what hope. He trod at soil that failed beneath his feet, and journeyed in stone strength to the
Fugitive.
His stray behind him was a branching line of glimmering points in a vague immensity. A bodiless Maya traveled at his side in the cooler gloom, compelling against light. A huge obstruction its immobile heart. The watching opacity multiplied as he moved. Its ostrich mask, head and staring eyes. The darkness quivered like a dying torch. Around him, an extinguished phantom lamp
Glow.
glowed. People with shadowy and misleading shapes. The ragged inconscience, dark and measureless scale. His only sunlight was his spirit's flame.
Yes. So it seems that in between these worlds, these planes and levels, there's a kind of misty area. At the beginning of the canto, we read about something like that he became aware of the mist surrounding this realm of little life, and he wanted to look deeper into it. He wanted to know the force that moved it, and the idea that's made it, and the ruling spirit of its littleness, and the divine law that gives this realm its right to be. So that is what has led him to explore this canto. But now it's as if he's found some answers, some understanding, some realization, and so he moves on in this misty realm, natal mist, the mist of birth, across the dangerous haze, the pregnant stir. Something is moving, something's going to give birth. And it's as if 𝒔𝒊𝒕𝒚, with his will, cuts a way through that mist. To shear means to cut. He shore a way through that astral chaos. Astral is a word that occultists use about the subtle atmospheres. Actually, it means it has to do with stars. So perhaps this is the kind of chaos, the disorganized state of the universe which has given rise to the stars. But he's able to cut a way through it. And he's passing between the gray faces of its demon gods, these horrible beings who are controlling that little life. And he's being questioned by whispers of its flickering ghosts. Who are you? What are you doing here? He's even being attacked by sorceries, the magic of its fluent force, its force which is fluid, ungraspable. So Sri Aurobindo says, 𝒔𝒊𝒕𝒚, it's as if he's a stranger walking without a guide through fields, through areas that are strange to him. He doesn't know where he's going and what he can hope to find. And just like at the beginning of Canto 3, the soil, the ground that he's walking on is not steady, it's shaking. A soil that failed beneath his feet. It's as if there's no firm base for him to move. What is enabling him to move forward is his stone strength. He has made himself strong like a stone. But he's moving onwards to a fugitive end. It's as if wherever it is he's directing himself to, it just moves further away, further and further away. And if he looks back where he has come, his trail behind him, it's like a vanishing line of little glimmering points, faint points of light in that vague immensity, that mist. And as he moves on, there's as if voices, no forms, voices, a bodiless murmur traveled at his side. It's as if the darkness feels wounded by that light of King 𝒔𝒊𝒕𝒚 moving, and so it's complaining against his light. The heart of that darkness is a huge obstruction. It just wants to stop him. That mist which surrounds him is opaque. It doesn't allow him to see clearly where he's going. But it's as if many eyes are watching him as he moves in that opaque mist. He can't see properly, but there are many hostile eyes, a hostile mass of dead and staring eyes. And the darkness glimmers. There is a faint light, but it's as if it's a light that is going out, a dying torch. So all around him, there's this extinguished phantom glow. It's as if it's the afterlight of something that has gone out. But within it, there are these shadowy and misleading shapes. They are peopling the cave, the vague, inconscious, dark and measureless cave. The cave from which everything has arisen. So in that terrible darkness, his only sunlight, his only guide is the flame of his own spirit. So shall we go back to line 707?
Our error crucifies reality to force its birth and divine body here, compelling, incarnate in a human form and breathing in limbs that one can touch and clasp. Its knowledge to rescue an ancient ignorance, its savior light, the inconscient universe. And when that greater self comes sea-like down to fill this image of our transience, all shall be captured by delight, transformed. In waves of undreamed ecstasy shall roll our mind and life and sense, and laugh in a light other than this hard, limited human day. The body's tissues thrill apotheosized, its cells sustain bright metamorphosis. This little being of time, this shadow soul, this living dwarf figurehead of darkened spirit, out of its traffic in petty dreams shall rise. Its shape of person and its ego face, divested of this mortal travesty, like a clay troll kneaded into a god, new made in the image of the eternal guest. It shall be caught to the breast of a white force, and flaming with the paradisal touch, in a rose fire of sweet spiritual grace, in the red passion of its infinite change, quiver awake and shudder with ecstasy. As if reversing a deformation spell released from the black magic of the night, renouncing servitude to the dim abyss, it shall learn at last who lived within unseen, and seized with marvel in the adoring heart to the enthroned child Godhead kneel aware, trembling with beauty and delight and love. But first the Spirit's ascent we must achieve out of the chasm from which our nature rose. The soul must soar sovereign above the form and climb to summits beyond mind's half sleep. Our hearts we must inform with heavenly strength, surprise the animal with the occult God. Then, kindling the gold tongue of sacrifice, calling the powers of a bright hemisphere, we shall shed the discredit of our mortal state, make the abysm a road for heaven's descent, acquaint our depths with the supernal ray, and cleave the darkness with the mystic fire. Adventuring once more in the natal mist, across the dangerous haze, the pregnant stir, he through the astral chaos shore away mid the grey faces of its demon gods, questioned by whispers of its flickering ghosts, besieged by sorceries of its fluent force. As one who walks unguided through strange fields, tending he knows not where, nor with what hope, he trod a soil that failed beneath his feet, and journeyed in stone strength to a fugitive end. His trail behind him was a vanishing line of glimmering points in a vague immensity. A bodiless murmur travelled at his side, in the wounded gloom complaining against light. A huge obstruction, its immobile heart, the watching opacity multiplied as he moved its hostile mass of dead and staring eyes. The darkness glimmered like a dying torch. Around him an extinguished phantom glow peopled with shadowy and misleading shapes, the vague inconscience, dark and measureless cave. His only sunlight was his spirit's flame,